Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. As the announcement said, we are in listen-only mode, so hopefully that means you can hear us, but we can't hear you. So if you have any questions today, please click on the icon to ask a question, and we will take those either during the presentation or certainly at the end. Again, just a couple of reminders as per usual in our webinar format. We will send out a link to today's recording as well as a copy of the slide deck that we're using. My name is Sean O'Brien. I'm the president of QwickRate, and as always, I'm pleased to be joined by Steve Huntington. Steve's the director of analytics here at QwickRate and QwickAnalytics, and he will walk you through our CECLSolver today. Just a reminder, certainly for those of you who've been on previous broadcasts or certainly QwickRate webinars, we have over the past few years begun to offer additional services such as QwickAnalytics and now IntelliCredit. So certainly encourage you to take a look at those things. Certainly thank you for being on today's webinar to learn more about CECLSolver, which is part of QwickAnalytics. And so just understand while we continue to pioneer the non-brokered CD marketplace, we have tried to develop additional fintech solutions that are affordable and easy to use for our banking customers. These QwickAnalytics and IntelliCredit are both cloud-based solutions. I think fundamentally and primarily what we try to do for our users is aggregate data so you can spend your time analyzing data. And so again, we try to just bring you technology that perhaps is evolutionary and simply try to make you and the things that you're doing on a daily basis much easier to do. QwickAnalytics, as I mentioned, we certainly are going to discuss the CECLSolver, but we do a number of different things. And we aggregate data from a number of sources, primarily the call report, but as you can see on this screen, plenty of other sources. So it's a tremendous resource that has multiple applications for users within the bank. We kind of break it up into a few different areas, one being bank and peer performance tools. So again, it's a wonderful tool to do peer comparisons. We have interactive bank pages on all of the banks in the country, which again, we aggregate and format for you so you can access and analyze. And then we've built regulatory tools such as the CECLSolver, but we also have a portfolio level credit stress test as well as an Excel add-in tool. So a whole lot here. Again, we're going to focus on CECL today, but just know within QwickAnalytics, which you'd be actually subscribing to if you chose to move forward with us, you're going to get a whole lot more with your subscription. So let's talk about CECL, right? The clock is ticking. While we still have plenty of time till this kicks into place, it is getting a little bit closer. You do want to give yourself some time to run a couple of quarters at least, in comparison so you can get familiar with the new process. And I always think, so much has been said and written about CECL that I think it's important to always take a step back and take a deep breath and just remember what we're trying to accomplish here. Reserves, and that's really what we're after here, defining a level of reserves. They're designed to cover expected losses. Capital is there for the unexpected losses. And again, we are simply being asked to do something in a new way, right? No one likes change being forced upon them. I think that's one of the, really, points of contention with CECL, right? Nobody likes change. Nobody likes to force change upon us. But nevertheless, this is where we are. But I think when you look at what we're being asked to do, it is a change, but it doesn't have to be feel tremendously different from what we're doing today. Throughout this process, many banks have asked us, what was wrong with the incurred loss model. Really, there wasn't anything exposed until the financial crisis. Clearly, then it had some shortcomings. So if you were at FASB, you had the decision to make, if something doesn't work, do you fix it or do you just leave it be, right? They clearly chose to fix it, which I think most of us would agree was the right thing. Again, on the other end of it, we don't like that it's changing our lives, but from their position, you can certainly understand why they did it. I have, become fond of saying very tongue-in-cheek we are playing the same game with a new set of rules. Again, let's not lose sight of what we're doing. We're trying to establish a reserve level to cover expected losses. And we're moving from the ALLL, where we kind of looked at annual charge-off experience, and we're moving to CECL, where we're looking at a life of loan type of charge-off analysis. So again, same process, just a different way of getting at the reserve. So important to keep in mind. Q factors are still going to remain a large part of what we do. And I think, again, from the time CECL was introduced to where we are now, we've come a long way from theory to practice, and utilizing the call report to aggregate your data has become recognized as, quite practical and viable for community banks. Certainly, as I mentioned, a lot of these theoretical considerations have been replaced by practical realities. Data has really become, at the forefront of the analysis, right? Banks are constrained by their data, and that limits them in the types of methodologies that they can select. And as a result of that, I would say the overwhelming number of community banks are using a portfolio-based solution, and oftentimes some type of WARM analysis, weighted average remaining maturity analysis. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And again, I think what you'll see after today is, regardless of where you are in your process, we can get you up and going, same day if you want, but we can make this process, a lot less filled with anxiety, right? We're gonna keep you moving along. There have been a number of myths that have been dispelled over time here. One is that there's no mandatory method for CECL. It is your choice, and certainly community banks under $1 billion are not going to need to engage in highly and complex requirements. For those reasons, that's why we introduced CECL. We wanted to try to make this compliance effort as anxiety-free and effortless as possible. We think we've built a solution that's applicable to banks of all sizes. It is, we believe, very practical and understandable once you kind of go through it, particularly with your own data. And again, we're going to be here as much as you need us to be to get you to the finish line. I think that's one thing we've always prided ourselves on here at QwickRate, and we've certainly continued to follow through with that, maxim here with QwickAnalytics. Is we're gonna make sure we support what we sell. To that end, we've developed a number of different resources that you can access and utilize. They're within our application. These are just some of the examples. We've built user guides and methodologies. We've also provided links to presentations that the regulators have done. So the tool has been, shown to, the FDIC, the OCC, multiple regulators. We've done trainings for the FDIC. So we're really pleased with where and how the tool has stood up. So at this point, I am going to turn the presentation over to Steve, and he is going to walk you through our CECLSolver. Steve, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Sean. Bear with me a moment while I get it up and running here. Let me know when that pops up.
I can see your screen.
Excellent. Thanks again, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. What you're looking at right now on the screen is kind of the first page, or the summary page, for our CECLSolver. The entire tool lives on our website, so you log in, and all the data is there pretty much in an interactive manner. All the data is saved securely on the cloud, and the first thing that you'll notice when you log into our tool, because we're starting with segmentation based upon the information that we can get from everybody's call reports, the tool is populated with your entire historical data, balances, charge-offs, recoveries, past dues by segment, going back as far or even farther than we need to from a CECL perspective from the first time that you log in. So the goal here is to try to help you guys spend your time on CECL as wisely as possible. What you don't need to be spending an inordinate amount of time on is reconciling accounts and getting data into a system or a tool or a calculator in order to help you with CECL. What you need to be spending, or should be spending, the vast majority of your time on are all the assumptions, right? All the qualitative aspects of reserve accounting that are still a huge part under CECL, just as much, in fact, even more so than under the current incurred loss methodology. But looking at the tool here, you'll notice that, again, we've started our initial segmentation, at least by default, around the call report segments. There is the ability to add custom risk pools down here, which we'll get into in just a little bit. But we're heavily utilizing the weighted average remaining maturity, or the WARM method for short. We have some elements of the open pool snapshot methodology as well integrated into the tool. And as it's one of the more straightforward approaches that are kind of acceptable for CECL compliance, when you start by plugging in weighted average remaining maturities, or WARMs, for each segment of the loan portfolio, not surprisingly, that's an exercise that obviously is front and center in the WARM method, but is really something that's unavoidable and part of the process, no matter what methodology you utilize for complying with CECL, because it's all about losses, or estimating losses over the remaining lives of the assets or the pools. So we have to get a handle on what those remaining lives look like on a pool by pool basis. Now, that's the one piece of the puzzle here that we can't get, at least directly, from the call reports. Nowhere on there does it require you guys to do any average remaining maturity or remaining life calculations. So we need a little bit of help from our users on the front end to do those remaining maturity calculations, and then plug them into the tool. And from that point on, the tool really gets to work and handles the vast majority of the number crunching here, and gets you right to working on the assumptions and the qualitative factors. There's lots of ways you can tackle doing the WARM calculations. If you're lucky, your core processor may have some reports that you can request or run that do WARM calculations for you, and also give you some estimates of what prepayments might look like. If that's not something you're getting assistance from your core, which is also quite frequent, then it's something that you guys will have to do some internal calculations, or you can hand the entire process over to us. Whether you want to do the WARM calculations, or whether you want to securely upload your loan level data to us so that we can help you and do the WARM calculations for you on an ongoing basis, the choice is yours as to how much of the data you want to provide us and how much assistance you need in calculating those WARMs on the front end. We do have a WARM estimator tool. It's an Excel-based tool which shows you, if you're doing the WARM calculations, exactly how you would go about doing it and get the proper prepayment adjusted WARMs that are required for CECL compliance. I'll open up that Excel spreadsheet for just a second here so you can get a brief idea of what that looks like. You don't need a lot. The only loan data that you really need are balances and maturity dates for most of the portfolio. From the balance and maturity dates, we can calculate what the remaining life of each loan is. We can do a weighted average of those. We can overlay a prepayment assumption, and then we can get a weighted average remaining maturity calculation for each segment of the portfolio. There are certainly outliers, for example, credit card loans that don't have a stated contractual maturity date, or open-ended lines of credit, excuse me. And there's multiple ways you can sort of get a proxy for maturity date through looking at recent payment history and interest rates and whatnot. So we can help you with that process as much or as little as necessary. But suffice to say, once we get those WARMs, we plug them in here, and then the tool is sort of off and running. So we're going to pick a guinea pig for today. The bank that we're using today is a sample bank. It's a large community bank out of the Northeast. And let's say we calculated our, the 1 to 4 family junior liens. Let's say we calculated a WARM of 7.5 years. As soon as we plug that in, it takes just about 2 seconds, and everything across the board, as it pertains to junior liens for CECL, just got recalculated on the fly. So the other thing that you'll notice about this tool is whenever you change any assumption or any input, the entire tool recalculates on the fly. And the reason this is so important is when you're spending your time building different scenarios and trying to find what's really going to move the needle, right? What assumptions are critical to the outputs and which ones are relatively it's not very sensitive to, or can be completely irrelevant given your situation. Pretty much finding out what you should be spending the majority of your time on and what you should not be spending much time on. If you're using some other methodologies or models where you've got to plug in hundreds of assumptions over lots of pages and then run the entire report and get an output, and then if you change something, you have to go through that whole process again, then when you look at the output, it looks very different, and you can't really back into what of the changes caused that difference. It can be very challenging to really nail that down and explain it or justify it and defend it to your examiners and auditors. That kind of an issue is not an issue at all with our tool, given that it's all recalculating in real time. But let's kind of walk through the process for the junior liens here and just see what's going on. With a WARM of 7.5 years, once we plug that in, we know what CECL is really requiring of us is that we project 7.5 years worth of losses going forward on this segment, right? Losses over the remaining life of the asset or pool. Now, if we're going to project 7.5 years worth of losses going forward, we start as our baseline. Well, we look to history, right? Over the last 7.5 years, what did our experience look like? So by default, we kind of match the forward-looking projection period to the WARM going back in history. So we have a look-back period that matches our WARMs. And all the data that goes into these calculations here, this historical life of the loan loss rate, which is the first big piece of the puzzle for CECL, is detailed right here in the historical analysis. Because we're using a relatively straightforward methodology, there's really no black box of data in here. You can follow all these calculations completely directly back to the data that you publicly filed on your call report just within these pages here. So if I click on the historical tab, this is where I'm going to get a lot of the supporting details that go into the first big part of the equation, our historical lifetime loss rate. So we see here, the first thing we're analyzing are balances. So here are your period end balances going back in time further than we need to from a CECL perspective. Down here below the balances, where we can take a look at your gross charge-off trends over time. Below that, we'll look at your gross recovery trends. And then at the bottom, finally, we'll see net charge-off trends and net charge-off ratio trends. Again, all this data is preloaded into the system the second you first log in. You never have to input any of this data, not initially when you first sign up and not on an ongoing basis. As soon as you file your call reports for the quarter, all the current balances update, and as soon as the filing period is over and everyone has their call reports in, then all of the historical data for both you and your peer group, which we'll talk about momentarily, is loaded automatically into the system, and you get an email from us saying, hey, all the next quarter's data is available if you want to update your analysis with more recent historical financials. Now, first thing we analyze, again, historically, are balances. So we see for the junior liens, balances have increased over time and are at averaging about $19 or $20 million over the look back period. Down here, we see how charge-offs have accumulated and what trend charge-offs or direction they're headed in. And they've totaled about $600 and some thousand over the entire lifetime look back period for this bank. And then finally, recoveries, they've continued to trickle in here, but not too much to speak of, 55,000 in aggregate. And so net charge-offs have totaled 587,000. And if we want to toggle over and look at that on a percentage basis, which is most important, we can see all those annual net charge-off ratios. And then finally, this aggregate lifetime or life of the loan loss rate of 2.94%, relatively high for this bank. Now I head back to the summary results, and there's that 2.94%. So you can pretty much, from cradle to grave, trace and audit what these historical rates and numbers are back to what you had on your call report. So once we've done that, once we've analyzed those trends, gotten comfortable with our look back periods, which are customizable, and then we've calculated our historical lifetime loss rate. That's the first half. That's the first half of the puzzle for CECL. The second half is all of the fudge factors, right? All of those qualitative factor adjustments that cumulatively represent all the reasons we think current and future conditions might be different from the historical conditions which produced these calculations right here. Now, there's a reason why we show the peer data right here front and center on the summary tab. The peer data does not automatically work its way into your CECL calculations at all. until you make qualitative factor adjustments to account for the peer experience. So let's talk about those qualitative factors. I'm going to toggle over to an internal version of our site so I can show you an updated Q factors tab, which is just going live now. On the Q factors tab, this is where kind of your home base for all of your qualitative adjustments. We have external adjustments based upon peer experience, economic conditions, other factors, and then internal or other Q factors. And all of these columns here are just based upon, you'll probably recognize a lot of these. They're probably already a part of your reserve analysis because they're directly from the interagency regulatory guidance that's been around for at least 15 years plus. The types of qualitative factor adjustments that you would make under CECL don't have to be very different at all from the process that you're currently using in your incurred loss methodologies, in your ALLL. You want to consider portfolio mix, changes in your staff, loan review systems, collateral values, concentrations. All those suggested adjustments are still relevant under CECL. You certainly don't have to use all those adjustments. You can choose certain ones to make adjustments for, and other ones. If you haven't really had anything change from a lending and management and staff position, you can simply get rid of that adjustment completely. And so you can remove Q factors that are not relevant to your situation. You can also add other custom qualitative factor adjustments right here, custom ones, and do it by segment or do it across the board for the entire portfolio. As you make adjustments via Q factors, the net Q factor adjustment recalculates on the fly here. And that's the net adjustment that will work its way back to the summary tab. Now, from a best practices standpoint, the most important aspect of these qualitative factors is going to be, as the auditors will always tell you, document, document, document. This is where you get serious points for paper. As you're making these adjustments, there's a section for notes for each segment separately. So this is where you'll come in and start building that narrative, the explanation for why you made the specific adjustments to your historical experience that you've made here. Once you finish making these notes, they get attached to the segment throughout the entire analysis. So whenever you save a scenario, whenever you export it to a PDF or print it off, there'll be a page which has all these narratives and notes attached right to the segment right next to the Q factor adjustment. So when you're sharing it with an auditor or an examiner, it's easy sort of for them to follow what your thought process was. And also just internally, right? When you come back in here next quarter to update your analysis with new financials and everything else, you're gonna need a little refresher as to what you were thinking when you made these adjustments, last time. So you make all the adjustments you want here. One of the critical adjustments, one of the critical qualitative factor adjustments that we give you a lot of help with and guidance with, and is, I think, particularly critical in the point we're at in history when it comes to asset quality. We certainly had a very severe credit quality crisis back in 2009, 10, 11, 12, at least in certain parts of the country. But the last few years have been a very benign asset quality environment. Median net charge-offs for community banks across the country right now are 0.00%. So fully 60%, I think, of all the community banks in the country have negligible losses right now. Have we seen any sort of corresponding dramatic dive in loan loss reserves? Of course we haven't, right? It's really just about, we're looking outside of our four walls at the environment around us to justify reserves being almost as high now as they were 7 years ago. And so you need to be able to look externally for trends, not just in your own portfolio, but in your peers' portfolios. You say, listen, we haven't had any losses in mortgage loans over the last decade, so how are we supposed to justify a reserve for it? Well, what if we could look at all the first liens for all the community banks in our county and track them over that same 7, 8, 9-year period and get an apples to apples peer comparison? That's exactly what we allow you to do using our tool. So if we were to take this historical analysis here, right? Where we're aggregating all the losses of the balances, charge-offs, recoveries for your whole portfolio, going back in time and just gathering all this data. If we did this entire analysis for every single other bank in your peer group simultaneously, all in the background, so just, crunching millions of numbers and averaging it all together, we would get exactly this. And that's what we've done. So when you pick your look back periods and you plug in your WARMs and you choose a peer group, whether it's all the community banks in my state, or whether it's community banks 100 to $300 million in the 5 counties that surround me in Northwest Georgia. It's very easy and intuitive to build peer groups using our platform. You can come up right here to custom peer groups, and you have financial filters, geographic filters, it's very easy and takes about 30 seconds really to build a completely custom peer group. As soon as you do that, you can choose that custom peer group from your drop down box here, and then all this data here in a few seconds will completely refresh. And what this represents is the peer weighted average loss rates by segment, using the exact same segmentation that we've used for your bank, right? All the same call report segments right here. And we're also overlaying your look back periods. So we're calculating, in effect, your peers' average lifetime loss rate. That's perfectly apples to apples comparable with your lifetime loss rate, to give you an idea of, are you outperforming your peers over the long run in your losses in this specific segment? And what direction are you going versus your peers? And how much do you want to take that into account via qualitative factors, right? This can be one of the most critical and helpful and defensible Q factor adjustments if you've got a goose egg of losses in a segment over 10 years, but your peers have 40 basis points. This gives you a very easy way to justify making a 20, 30 basis point qualitative factor adjustment, right? And that's why we kind of present the data here the way that we do. But once you've entered all your Q factor adjustments, you come back to the summary, and the net of all those adjustments is right here on the Q factors tab. You'll also notice that these net adjustments are overridable. They're calculated from all your factors, but they're overridable. So if you ever want to come in here, create a scenario very quickly and say, listen, I don't got the time to go through all these Q factors for all these segments. I kind of just want to do, kind of spitball some very quick numbers to see where we're at. You can simply come in here and plug in a summary Q factor adjustment without going into all the detail to see what would happen. And when as soon as you type it in, it recalculates everything across the board and gives you a CECL reserve based upon that Q factor. So very flexible with how much granularity and detail you want in the qualitative factor process. But once we've completed that, we've now pretty much arrived at your expected future loss rate, right? It's your historical experience plus or minus the net of all your adjustments to it is what you expect moving forward. This is what CECL is requiring of us. Once we have that, we simply have to apply that expected loss rate, lifetime loss rate, to our current balance and deal with any individually assessed loans or anything like that separately, which we'll talk about in a second. And we end up with a CECL requirement for each segment of the portfolio. Right here, the current balances are also overridable. They will default to the most recent data that we have from your call report, which we're only getting quarterly. That's why we made this overridable. We didn't want to hardwire into the tool that you could only update it, on a quarterly basis. Obviously, this doesn't limit. You can run the tool as often as you want, as of whatever date you want. All you have to do is come in here and override these quarter end balances with what your current balances are as of yesterday or whatever date you want to run the report as of. Once we plug in those balances, we can also make some adjustments here to our balances. If we have any loan balances that are outside the scope of CECL, for example, a large government guaranteed portion of an SBA program that you might have, or if you have any significant PPP or COVID loans still on the books, or if you have a large portfolio of held for sale loans that are on the books at fair market value, those things that are either guaranteed and have no risk of loss or are just simply outside the scope of CECL, we can back those balances out right here. We can make a note of it right here. This is another page where we have the ability to make notes across the portfolio and attach them to the segments. If they had $10 million of PPP loans, they could come in here, net that out, and then just make a note that we netted out 10 million PPP. Once you've made those adjustments, the last step is to deal with any individually assessed loans. So we have a tab specifically for that. This is where you'd plug in any individual loans, or you can do it at the individual loan level and add a bunch of loans here. Or if you want to just tally up all of your first liens that you feel like need to be individually assessed, default is imminent and you have a pretty well-defined idea of what the loss might be. You plug that information in here, let us know what segment it's coming from, so we make sure we don't double count the losses. Plug in the balance and the expected collection amount. We can tally up what the CECL reserve is for those individually assessed loans, and then net them out of the pool balance here, the collectively assessed pool balance, and then move forward. Once we've done that, we get a CECL reserve for each segment. We can add them all up. We get a total CECL requirement for the collective pool. Then we layer back in the reserve for the individually assessed loans if we had any there. We've just recently added a new tab for held to maturity securities. This is not a very big piece of, it's not even a piece of the puzzle at all for a lot of community banks. But FASB has deemed that, listen, CECL is not only about the loan portfolio. You also need to look at any assets that are carried at amortized cost, right? So if you have a sizable held to maturity securities portfolio, one that doesn't just consist of government guaranteed or government sponsored, which are pretty much have the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, which hopefully, again, if those have credit risk, then we've got bigger fish to fry than CECL. But if you have corporate bonds in there or other types of securities that have a real possibility of credit loss, this is where you could come in and plug those pools in and make an estimate of any potential loss there. And it would pull back into the summary here. Again, it's not very relevant for a lot of community banks, but it is something we do have to make sure we've at least looked at. Once we've done that, the last piece of the puzzle is unfunded commitments. So FASB is sort of requiring that that we calculate a reserve for the off-balance sheet credit exposure separate from the loan loss reserve. It sits in the other liabilities section of the balance sheet. It's not technically a new concept either, right? Your call reports right now already have a line item for current allowance for off-balance sheet credit exposures or unfunded commitments, but it's one that the vast majority of community banks aren't really dealing with. I think most people either leave it blank or just put zero there, even if they probably shouldn't. But I think there's going to be a little bit of a renewed focus on this under CECL. So if you've been doing that historically and getting away with it, I don't know if you still will. So we wanted to provide, as sketchy as some of the details are out there in the accounting and regulatory world as to how properly to deal with the unfunded commitments, there's not a lot of good guidance out there, but we did speak with the regulators and FASB and came up with a module here to help you navigate that. So we can pull out the total unfunded commitments by segment with some different segmentation from the call reports. We ask you to help us kind of determine how much of those are unconditionally cancelable. You don't have to deal with any unconditionally cancelable unfunded commitments for CECL. Things like unused credit card lines are pretty much the definition of unconditionally cancelable. HELOCs are questionable. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. So we work with you to kind of net out all the unconditionally cancelable ones. Whatever's left over, the net unfunded commitment, we have to deal with in some way, shape, or form from a CECL perspective. And that's where things get kind of hypothetical here, right? Because they're asking you to jump through some mental hoops so that you can project long-term future losses on loans that don't really exist yet, right? So it's all a little bit esoteric, but you start by estimating the probability of funding, right? Within that period. And we give you some guidance and default values for probability of funding that are derived from the credit conversion factors that the FDIC themselves came up with in Schedule RCR Part 2. So there's a guide down here that helps you with that a little bit. And then the weighted average remaining commitment, so how long you're going to have these commitments for. In practice, a lot of these types of commitments, from a legal perspective, they tend to renew on or are reviewed annually. And so while you might have had some unused commitments that were technically on the books for 15 years, if there's some sort of legal process where you're reviewing or renewing it on an annual basis, as of today, you would only have a legal obligation for 1 year. So you're going to want to look a little carefully at that before you overestimate the length of the remaining legal commitments there, because that will certainly affect your CECL calculation. And then finally, if they were to be funded, what kind of losses might we expect to see? Well, luckily, we got some good default values there because, well, we just finished a nice long analysis of what loss rates your portfolio actually are expected to see. So those are the steps you go through, and you get a calculation for a CECL for the unfunded commitment. Again, this is not something that I would suggest spending a ton of time pulling your hair out about, because from a dollar perspective, it's typically a very small piece of the puzzle. But since it's on the call report, you know, it's fair game for them to ask you about it and dig into it if they really felt like getting up on the wrong side of the bed. And that's pretty much step by step how the tool works. Once we layer all that in, we get a total CECL requirement. We can compare it to your current reserve, and we let you know, before you have before you're complying with CECL, right? Before next year, what your current surplus or shortfall is compared to your actual reserve at this point in time. So that's pretty much how the tool works from a step-by-step process. When you're plugging in all these inputs, as you've done so, building a scenario, as soon as you're done, you want to make sure you save it as a scenario, give it a name, give it a date. As soon as you click create, it's saved on our servers. You can come back here and access your scenarios anytime you want to. You can have as many scenarios as you want to. This drop-down box will go on forever. In fact, that's another best practice. We suggest that every time you come in here and you have some updated financials, it's a month or a quarter later, and you're updating the analysis, that you save it as a new scenario and give it a date so that you can track and trace what's really changing over time, right? Why is our CECL reserve this much higher or lower compared to our ALLL 6 months ago versus today? And those are the kind of questions that your examiners and certainly your auditors are going to want to see, that you're doing some parallel runs over time and you're tracking how that's changing as we get closer to implementation date. And our tool makes that process very easy. You can also certainly save multiple scenarios for the same point in time. If you want to have an optimistic, a Q factor scenario and then a more pessimistic economic scenario, you can have them side by side, and you can toggle back and forth between those two scenarios and see, pretty much instantaneously in a real-time basis, how much is it moving the needle? Like when we get more pessimistic about the economy and we think that's going to have effect on our CRE, which has a large risk weighting or capital compared to capital, how much is that going to push the reserve if we expect those losses to maybe be a little bit higher? Those kind of what if scenarios and comparisons are very, very easy to do using our tool. And certainly with this interactive environment is practical, but when it's time to share it externally with your auditors and examiners, you're going to want to have some control over what data you send them. So when you export the tool, you have complete control over how much of a data and what type of data you are exporting, whether it's just a summary for your board, whether it's the whole shoot and match for an auditor, or anything in between. And you can export that to a PDF environment or an Excel environment. If you do the PDF environment, it just takes a few seconds. It'll open up a new tab in your browser, and boom, you got the whole tool in a PDF environment. All the notes that we made at the segment level are all included in the export. All the historical data, if you want it, with the highlighted look back periods, because again, we're using different look back periods for each segment, depending upon how long of a life that the average duration of that segment. And as much or as little detail as you like here, the qualitative factor adjustments and everything else. And again, you can also export it directly into an Excel environment. The nice thing about the Excel environment is that it retains all the spacing and shading and visual formatting of the interactive tool. So if you wanted to pull it into Excel, open it up, add some rows and columns to make more copious notes, maybe connect to some of the data, create some additional charts or analysis in here, you can do it all in the Excel environment, and it's still a relatively attractive, followable presentation, so to speak, and you can almost print it directly from Excel and have it look somewhat reasonable. I know we've already 40 minutes into it today, so I'll try to speed up for the rest here. But as Sean mentioned, lots of resources here, a user guide, a methodology guide. This will kind of take you step by step through the process, on a quarterly basis if you've kind of forgotten how to run the tool. A draft of an implementation letter has some policy language to kind of get you started on redrafting that stuff from a CECL perspective. This is another link to that Excel-based warm estimator tool, which is just yours. You can do whatever you want with it, use it, not use it, save it locally. If you have us doing your warms for you, if you're uploading your CDLR or your flat file to our systems so that we can do the warms, we will provide the warms to you in that same Excel format so that you can have them moving forward. This is the result of our recent SOC Type 1 report that we did, just kind of validating the tool and the methodology. And these are some of the better presentations that we've seen from FDIC, FASB, and those interagency panels that discuss CECL in general, then the warm method specifically, and are more focused on from a community bank perspective. So we think there's a lot of stuff out there, but these are some of the better ones right from the horse's mouth, so to speak. Last year, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention it. As we all know at this point, the Fed came out with the scale tool and did some more refining of that with the ELE or LE. We thought that the scale tool was interesting enough that we wanted to at least make it available as part of our tool. We weren't trying to sort of improve upon the scale tool. I think the improvement upon the scale tool is our CECLSolver, certainly. But a lot of times your auditor or examiner might say, hey, do you have any sort of sanity check on your methodology? Do you have a secondary methodology you're using just to kind of double check to see if it would come out in the same range? And we thought a good companion to the CECLSolver would be giving you the ability to very quickly and efficiently run the Fed scale tool using their methodology. Again, this is just us recreating the Fed's methodology within our interactive environment and giving you more better peer data. Since the scale tool, I don't know how familiar everybody is with it, it really is kind of somewhat backwards in its steps. It starts by assuming that you are going to perform going forward exactly like all of the large $1 to $10 billion banks in the country are currently performing, and then tell us in what ways you might be different. So it's kind of backwards from that perspective. But the peer data is super critical. It really is in the scale tool. So we wanted to make it easy for you to kind of cut and slice and dice the peer data to get some good, the most relevant peer data out of the call reports in order to get a scale calculation that might at least be helpful even as a backup. So this is how the scale tool works. You can certainly save scenarios. You can export it separately, and then you can use it just to compare to the CECL or CECLSolver. And at this point, I think I've touched on everything that I wanted to. Sean, do you want to take back control and we can walk through the remaining slides?
Sure. All right. So just kind of a recap, Steve covered that in great detail, so thank you, Steve. But we put these in here so you have them after you leave the call today. That just kind of summarizes some of the pages that Steve went through. Steve, anything you want to add here?
Nope. Just a reminder: the environment is all interactive, and all the historical data for you and your entire peer group is loaded from day one. So you really spend the vast majority of your time working on what you should be building the narrative around the things that are subjective, the decisions that you have to make as a management team in order to have a defensible reserve under CECL. Next slide. This is just about managing the tool, right? Using the scenarios, saving them over time, exporting what you need, making notes at the segment level, either general notes about the segment or notes about the qualitative factors or about the unfunded commitments, so that if you were to export this and send it to an examiner, they would already have a package that A, they could follow methodologically, and B, they can understand where and when and why you made assumptions that really move the needle on the calculation. And next slide. This is just the way the qualitative factor adjustments work with all of those suggested qualitative factors that you can add to, subtract from, or have a lot of customization. One thing I didn't point out in the tool is I forgot, you'll notice that you can click through this page. If you're on the Q Factors page, if you click on a different segment of the portfolio, that chart up on the top right there will update on the fly. So if you want to see a kind of a quick visual summary of all the most important elements of CECL for that one bucket, you click on the bucket, let's say first liens, and it'll show you your long-term trended losses, that's the blue bars, your peers' long-term trended losses, that's the green line, and you can see this bank is really tracking its peers very closely, at least up in Maine. And then see the gray shaded area there, that's the look back period that you're using to start estimating CECL. And then the orange line is the total CECL estimate based upon the inputs that you plugged in. And as you update Q factors, you'll see all those lines on the chart update before your eyes pretty much in real time. And you can also go upstream, meaning that drop down box that says net charge-offs up on the top right there, you can, if you want to see more emerging credit trends to get an idea of where things are headed, you can go upstream and look at non-accrual loans and see your trend in non-accruals in that segment going all the way back and comparing it to your peers and what your reserve is. Or even 30 to 89 days, which is the kind of as much upstream as you could possibly go on the call reports, right? As far as where you may be having some credit issues moving forward. Sean, next slide. Just a reminder of how to manage the individually assessed loans for reference. Next slide, the held to maturity securities, which we recently added there. And this is just this is a good summary of the scale tool. So if you kind of want to get a feel for how the scale tool works, this slide is great because it tells you kind of what the basic inputs are and what it's trying to show you. And then the next slide is this is just a page, one of the many financial or pages on QwickAnalytics, on our analytics platform outside of the CECL tool, where you can just get data on the disaggregated reserve information from your peer groups. This is a great place where you can just say, hey, I know that the larger banks now on schedule, is it RIA, are having to fill out to disaggregate their reserve amounts for, there's not a lot of buckets, right? There's only 6 different buckets there that they're disaggregating, but it's better than nothing. And it gives you some idea, at least for larger banks, what the trends are right now in reserve levels with some granularity, or at least a little bit of segmentation. So we thought that was some really helpful information to add. Next slide. Great. Go ahead, Sean.
Yeah, thanks, Steve. I was just going to say, yeah, so here's just a listing of those 9 commonly used Q factors that many of the banks, many of you use in some form or fashion. Again, I think what we've tried to do is just, try to be, point out where we can, just, again, areas where we're still utilizing some of the things that we've done in the past. As you've seen from Steve's presentation, really the single biggest, and I don't even want to call it an obstacle, but the one area where we clearly, along with the Q factors, can't get information from the call report are these WARMs. So as Steve mentioned, we really focus on working with our banks to determine who will calculate this and how they'll calculate it. We try to provide you with a number of ways that you can do it yourself, but if you find that it's not worth the time, energy, or effort, we will calculate those for you. So again, that's one of the initial steps that we take with our bank to go through and determine who will do this, and then again, make sure we have that, because that gets really everything started in the CECLSolver. This is just an example of that ILDR file. If you're not familiar with it, again, I would suggest to you, if you think back to whatever loan tape you provide to your regulator when they come in, this is essentially the same file. This is really where this file originated from, was that request on behalf of regulators when they come in. So it should be familiar. Some people refer to it as the flat file, the alert file, the ILDR file. So again, it's known by many names, but essentially it's this 82 field file. One question we do get from time to time, right, is, maybe I want to break down or drill down further into a loan portfolio. Again, I think our focus with CECLSolver was to get people to the finish line and meet the compliance objective. Certainly, as you move forward, you may determine that you want to drill down deeper into those call report codes. Perhaps there are, types of loans within some of those segments that have different risk characteristics. We put this slide in to remind you, or just to let you know, we can do further analysis if necessary, certainly, predicated on the fact that the data is there. For most community banks, because your loss experience has been so good, we're not sure this is really necessary at this point, but we certainly do suggest warehousing that flat file so that in the future, should things change, you would have the necessary information to do a more granular, more loan level type of CECL analysis. So this is just kind of an FYI reminder that we can do further analysis if it's warranted. So next steps. One, obviously, thank you very much for tuning in today. Certainly, we have monthly coffee talks where we address questions about CECL and just other insights that we've gleaned from talking to now over 300 banks using our solution. For you personally, we'd love to take you through your information, so you can call or email us. We'll schedule a Zoom call to take you through your data. Again, we'll kind of talk through how the tool works and really help you kind of understand what would be necessary to get you up and going. As we mentioned earlier in the presentation, we can get you up and going the same day. And so we have plenty of time till necessary. But again, I think it's helpful for you to at least see the CECLSolver comparatively to a quarter or two of data. And so I think that's probably what everyone should be targeting, best case scenario. Certainly, as we mentioned, we're going to be here to help you, get to the finish line. So, again, it's designed for you to do it, but we're here to help you as much as you need us to. As we mentioned, we do monthly coffee talk sessions where we get on a Zoom call, take questions from our users, from our prospects. Usually, Steve and myself, or we'll bring on we've had auditors on with us to really, again, try to give you a broad spectrum of viewpoints to, again, help you get to the finish line with the least amount of anxiety possible. So I'm going to check to see if there are any questions. If you have any, you can go ahead and submit those. Here we go. Let's see. Have there been any other banking associations give the model any feedback or certification? So yes, I mean, this is a preferred service product of the ICBA. We are also maintain that designation with a number of state associations throughout the country. We have shown it to examiners, from the FDIC and the OCC. So, again, we're very comfortable with the tool. We've been through exams. I think no one's really had a problem with the solution. The suggestion they make, as Steve touched on earlier, just make sure that the recommendation from the examiners has pretty much been make sure the banks are documenting their Q process so we can understand. We certainly have references, with over 300 banks across the country. If you want references from an individual state, we're happy to share those as well. So we're very proud of what we built. We feel like we've built something that really hit the mark for what community banks are looking for. And, again, happy to talk to any of you about those or provide references if that's necessary. Okay, so I don't see any additional questions. As you mentioned, again, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to attend. I'll leave this number and email up if you like to reach out to us. For Quick Rate subscribers, you can reach out to the service team. You can reach out to Ricky, Melissa, or Pam. And again, we'll look forward to speaking to you in the future and seeing if we can help you. And and again, thank you very much for your time and have a great day. Bye now.
Thanks, everyone.